Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you all to our webinar, Eating Well and Exercise, tonight, and I'm so glad that you've joined us. My name is Brooke Kelly, and I am the National Melanoma Telehealth Nurse of Melanoma Patients Australia, otherwise known as MPA, and I will be your presenter for this evening. I would first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and their elders, past, present, and emerging. We want to sincerely thank MSD in its support of MPA in this webinar series. We are extremely appreciative of this. MPA is a non-for-profit organisation created specifically for the support of all melanoma patients Australia. MPA's vision is creating a world where no one affected by melanoma walks alone. I encourage you to refer to our website for further information on all of our services. We are privileged to have 3 speakers tonight and very grateful for their contribution and insight: Megan Sanders, Travis Hall, and Darren Purcell. Firstly, we will be recording this webinar, which will be published on our website in the next couple of weeks and in the future months as part of our new Wellness Hub. We plan to have a couple of Q&A opportunities at the bottom of your screen. You will find the Q&A function. This gives you the ability to ask questions anonymously. We want to warmly welcome our first guest speaker, Megan Sanders. Megan is an accredited practicing dietitian and is a current member of the Dietitians Australia. She graduated from her Master of Dietetic Practice at La Trobe University after having completed a Bachelor of Human Nutrition with honours at La Trobe University and a Bachelor of Psychology at Monash University. Currently working as a clinical oncology dietitian at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, Megan is passionate about ensuring optimal outcomes for all of her patients through prevention of malnutrition. She understands every patient's journey is different and as such works with her patients to develop individualised plans for managing symptoms and optimising their nutrition. Megan, thank you for agreeing to present this evening. We will now invite you to begin your presentation. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you for the introduction. I will just share my screen. And there we go. So hi, everyone. Yes, as mentioned, I am an accredited practicing dietitian at Peter Mac. And I suppose my main role is really preventing and treating malnutrition, which we do in a number of ways, from diet alone all the way to various forms of tube feeding. Nutrition is a really important part of a person's cancer journey, both during treatment and into survivorship. And I do feel really privileged to be able to help people navigate their way through this area. Now, I do just want to preface this with the information that I'm giving tonight is just general advice. So everyone is very different, and it is really important to have specific nutrition advice tailored to the individual. So with all of that said, tonight I will be covering a few different topics. So firstly, I will talk with you about what eating well during cancer typically looks like, as well as managing some of the more common side effects. I will then talk about eating well after cancer and into survivorship, and we'll talk through some myths around diet and cancer. I have just picked some of the most common ones that I come across in practice, but there are hundreds of these myths and fad diets out there. So I will then also talk about how to find trusted information and things to look out for when navigating the online world of nutrition and cancer. And finally, I'll point you in the direction of some useful resources and will, of course, be answering questions at the end. So to start, what does eating well during cancer treatment actually look like? And the answer is it will likely look very different for everybody. It's important to find what works best for you, as you may need to adapt what you eat to cope with your body's changing needs. So during treatment, you may experience a wide variety of side effects that can make it really difficult to eat and drink. And in addition to that, the amount of protein and calories that your body needs to maintain weight will likely increase. So we do talk a lot about weight maintenance throughout cancer treatment, as getting enough protein and calories is really important for your immune function, energy levels, and treatment tolerance, as well as recovery. So it really doesn't matter what weight you start at, whether that is 50 kilos or 150 kilos. Throughout treatment, we really do want to try to prevent weight loss as much as possible. So the first, and I guess in my experience, most common side effect we'll talk about is loss of appetite. And it's definitely one of the biggest contributors to unintended weight loss that we see in practice. So the first piece of advice I typically give my patients in this situation is, if you find portion sizes are decreasing or you just don't feel like eating a meal, trying to have much smaller but more frequent meals and snacks. Some people like the idea of eating to the clock. So trying to eat something every 2 to 3 hours rather than waiting for our body to tell us that it's time to eat. We also typically recommend what's called a high energy, high protein diet. So if we're eating less, we want the food that we are eating to really provide good bang for your buck. So picking foods that are typically higher in calories to help maintain our weight, and then higher in protein to really help with maintaining our muscle mass. So things such as your meat, fish and chicken, eggs, dairy products. If you are someone who avoids dairy, then choosing the soy-based alternatives, as these typically have a pretty similar protein content, whereas things like nut milks and oat milks are typically quite low in nutritional value. And having things like nuts and seeds, beans, tofu, legumes, that sort of thing. And a lot of people also may find it easier to drink something rather than eat something. So opting for a nourishing drink like a milk-based smoothie or something like that if you don't feel up to a meal. Another really common side effect that we see, especially for people who are having chemotherapy or immunotherapy, is nausea. And if this is something that is affecting you, my first piece of advice is to talk to your doctor. There are a lot of medications that can help manage nausea, but we do just want to be sure to be having them about half an hour before we eat, so that way they have a chance to kind of kick in before we try to have something. In addition to that, really trying not to skip meals. I know that can be easier said than done, but an empty stomach can actually make nausea worse. And when you feel unwell, you might find it easier to eat more dry and salty foods, or colder, more, I guess, simple foods. So some people can find that strong smells trigger nausea, or hot foods can have that same effect. So staying out of the kitchen if someone else is cooking can be helpful. Practicing good oral hygiene before and after meals has also been found to help. So whether that's brushing your teeth or using mouthwash, or even just like rinsing your mouth with some water. And finally, people often find things like ginger lollies, dry ginger ale, flat lemonade, and peppermint tea can help to settle nausea as well. So the next side effects that I'm going to talk about is bowel problems. So both diarrhea and constipation. I literally ask every single one of my patients about their bowel habits, because it can tell us a lot about what's going on for them. And diarrhea and constipation can also trigger other side effects. So it's a very important thing to talk about. And to start, I guess I wanted to talk about the fact that there are a lot of things that can cause bowel problems. And I really want to highlight this because we often find that people going through treatment attribute their bowel problems to specific foods, and then they will unnecessarily restrict certain foods to try to manage things. So firstly, your treatment can cause upset bowels, whether that be chemotherapy, immunotherapy, or radiotherapy. Antibiotics are a really common culprit for things like diarrhea, while pain medication regularly causes constipation. Infections and viruses can cause bowel problems. And this last one I've written in bold because I think it's a really important one to remember, but stress can upset our bowels. So our gut and brain are very strongly linked. So when we feel stressed, and I think it's safe to say that going through cancer treatment is a pretty stressful experience, we'll often experience things like diarrhea and constipation. So if you are experiencing diarrhea, it is really important to ensure adequate hydration. We do lose a lot of fluid when we have loose stools. So things like Hydralyte can be really helpful for this. Having smaller meals to put less stress on our digestive system, but then also having them more frequently to make sure that we're still getting enough nutrition. eating foods high in soluble fiber. So that's foods like your oats, white rice, and pasta type foods, and then trying to limit things like alcohol, caffeine, and artificial sweeteners, because these can actually contribute to speeding things up. In terms of managing constipation, again, fluid and hydration are really important. Sometimes dehydration can actually be the cause of constipation. And again, eating foods high in fiber, but this time we want both the soluble and the insoluble. So that's, again, your oats and grains, but also your fruits and vegetables. And I know many people, including a lot of my colleagues, that swear by 1 kiwi fruit a day to manage their constipation. So give that one a go. I don't know how much evidence is behind it, but it can't hurt. And finally, trying to incorporate some gentle movement, because that can really stimulate the muscles that help the bowels contract. The last side effect that I'm going to talk about is taste changes. And again, this is really, really, really common, especially with chemotherapy and immunotherapy. And it can be experienced in a few different ways. So some people will report that everything just tastes very bland. I get the everything tastes like cardboard sentence daily. And so to help manage this, we often recommend using things like extra salt and spices in cooking and serving foods with extra sauces and gravies to essentially boost the flavour. Other people may describe taste sensitivity. So things are suddenly very, sweet things, are suddenly very sweet, and salty things are suddenly very salty. And if this is the case, we kind of go in the other direction where we recommend more bland foods. Again, practicing really good oral hygiene, so brushing your teeth or using mouthwash can help as well. And finally, a lot of other people may experience a metallic taste when they eat. So again, good oral hygiene can help, but also using disposable or non-metal cutlery, because sometimes the metal cutlery that we use can exacerbate the metallic taste. So now we're going to move on to eating well after cancer treatment. So I guess to backtrack a little bit, for most people, definitely not everyone, but for most people throughout treatment, we really want to be focusing on protein and calories, especially if our eating has decreased or if we've been losing weight. However, once we've recovered from treatment, or if throughout treatment we're actually feeling quite well and we're not losing weight, the focus moves back to general healthy eating. So there are a lot of resources out there about eating well after cancer and into survivorship. And these are all essentially based off the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. So this guide just encourages choosing foods from all 5 food groups. So having a lot of variety in the diet, with the majority of our food being made up of whole grains and cereals and fruits and vegetables. And then also limiting or having, I guess, in moderation, things like your alcohol and saturated fats, making sure you're drinking plenty of water and staying really hydrated. So I realize that is a very brief overview, but at the end of the presentation, I will provide you with some websites and guides that have a lot more information about eating well in survivorship. So now we're going to move on to some common myths that frequently come up in conversation with my patients. And again, I've just picked out the 3, I guess, most common ones that come up. But as I'm sure anyone who has ever Googled nutrition and cancer will know, there are hundreds of different myths and fad diets and pieces of advice. And I imagine every single person you know will have an opinion on what you should be eating and that kind of thing. So just going to talk about the 3 most common ones, but then we will also talk about how to navigate that avalanche of information that we get in regards to nutrition. So firstly, and definitely the most common one that I get in practice, is the myth that sugar feeds cancer. So when we eat sugar or carbohydrates, our body then turns this into glucose in our blood. And the theory behind this myth is that cancer cells will take up and use that glucose faster than other types of fuel or other nutrients. And the idea is that if we deprive the body of sugar, we'll essentially starve cancer cells of their fuel source and subsequently slow their growth. The reality, however, is that all cells in our body, so not just cancerous cells, but our healthy cells as well, will use glucose as their primary source of fuel. And in the absence of glucose, they will just go on to the next fuel source, which would be protein and fats. And in addition to that, our body actually needs glucose to survive. So if we aren't getting dietary glucose, the body will produce glucose all on its own. And, I haven't yet to find a study that has been able to really confidently say that this myth is true. And what we do know is that it is really important that we provide our body with adequate nutrition at all times, but especially during cancer treatment. And if we then eliminate all sources of dietary sugars and carbohydrates, it can be really, really difficult to get the calories that our body needs for energy and to fight the cancer in the first place. The next myth that comes up really frequently is the idea that cancer thrives in an acidic environment. So by following an alkaline diet or eliminating all acidic foods from the diet, you can reduce cancer growth and potentially prevent it from occurring in the first place. The reality, however, is that it's actually impossible to alter the pH of your blood and your body through your diet. So no amount of acidic or alkaline foods will have an impact on this because our body really tightly controls the pH levels of our blood. And really, if you could change your blood pH, your healthy cells would actually also not survive and you would become very, very unwell very quickly. So to the best of my knowledge, again, there hasn't been a single study that has been able to support this theory. So yeah, that one is a big, big myth. And finally, the myth that intermittent fasting can prevent cancer and help with cancer recovery. So the reality of this is that fasting puts you at a much higher risk of not getting enough nutrition at a time when your body needs plenty of calories, protein, vitamins, and minerals to help you cope with treatment. And maintaining your weight throughout treatment is a really important factor in keeping you well. As I mentioned earlier, my main role is preventing weight loss in my patients. As for cancer prevention, the best research we have about this is to just follow a really well-balanced diet, including food from all 5 food groups and regular movement. So what should you do if there is a diet or supplement that you want to try? And my first piece of advice is to talk to your pharmacist and your dietitian. So some supplements and diets are really high in particular nutrients and they may interact with your treatment in a negative way, while some diets can be really restrictive and this will then put you at risk of malnutrition. When I have a patient that comes to me wanting to try a particular diet or supplement, I first like to get an idea of why they would like to try it. And often it really comes down to wanting to have a sense of control over their treatment and feeling like this is something they can be proactive with. Throughout treatment, I feel like a lot of, what's going on is kind of taken out of the patient's control. But what people eat and put in their bodies is something that they, it's a tangible thing that they can control. So sometimes the thing that people want to try can be really dangerous. So we will talk through the evidence and the risks and we'll encourage people to avoid those things. And sometimes the thing that they want to try can actually be incorporated into their treatment regime really safely. So an example of this is we do often discourage people from taking really high dose antioxidants or following a diet really high in antioxidants if they're on chemotherapy, because it can actually reduce the effectiveness of the chemotherapy. However, your pharmacist can work with you to kind of potentially decrease the dose or encourage you to take it at specific times away from your treatment if it's something that you would really like to continue with. And I know it can seem really daunting to ask health professionals about complementary and alternative medicines, but I assure you that our goal is to empower you with the knowledge to make informed decisions and just to ensure your safety if you wish to try something alongside your treatment. So where to from here? As I'm sure you're all very aware, there is a mountain of information about nutrition and cancer out there, and the internet can be a bit of a minefield. So I wanted to give you a few tips about how to navigate all of this. And the first thing to be aware of, I think, is the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian. And I'm definitely not saying that one is better than the other. And I personally know plenty of incredible nutritionists that do really wonderful work. However, for someone to call themselves a dietitian, we need to have completed a degree from a credible university, while legally anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. So they could have just done a 1-week online course. They could very well may have done a university degree, or they may have actually just done nothing at all. My partner who works in finance could call himself a nutritionist if he wanted to. So if you're reading information from a nutritionist, look for someone with a qualification from a well-known university. So ideally a Bachelor of Nutrition. And keep in mind that nutritionists aren't trained to manage specific illnesses and diseases like cancer. So they're really excellent for things like well-being and general health advice. But in terms of specific disease states, that is slightly outside of their scope. Another thing to be aware of is that dietitians are accredited and governed by Dietitians Australia. So this means that we have a really clear set of guidelines that outline our scope of practice. And it also requires us to complete really regular professional development to ensure that we're always practicing with the most up-to-date evidence-based information. Another thing to be aware of, and I have mentioned this a few times, but everyone is different. So what works for one person won't necessarily work for another, and nor will it necessarily be appropriate or safe. And that's where, the individualized approach is really, really important. So I often caution people when they're looking at anecdotal evidence or listening to personal stories from other people's experiences, and we can get a lot of value out of that sort of thing. But just realizing that just because it's worked for someone else doesn't mean it will necessarily work for you. As for social media, look really closely at people's credentials. So majority of the time, if someone has an appropriate qualification to be talking about nutrition online, this will be made really, really clear in their bios. So for example, on Instagram, anyone who's an accredited practicing dietitian will very likely have the acronym APD on their Instagram page. In addition to that, a big red flag for me on social media, and especially Instagram, specifically in the nutrition and cancer space, is if someone's trying to sell you something, it's very likely that they don't have your best interests at heart. And finally, if you feel you need more support with your eating and drinking, ask your doctor for a referral to a dietitian. So if you're being treated at a hospital, they should have a dietetic service available to you. Otherwise, your GP can refer you to a community dietitian, or you can always seek out a private practice dietitian if that's something that is, available to you. So this last slide just has some really good websites to go to find a bit more information about nutrition from really credible sources. So for people going through treatment, the Cancer Council are incredible and have lots of really great information specifically around nutrition and cancer, and as does the Peter Mac website. And for people who have finished treatment and are heading into survivorship, or people just interested in prevention and things like that, I've listed the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating website, but also a UK-based organisation called the Macmillan Cancer Centre or Cancer Support Centre. They have some really great guides around transitioning from that, higher calorie, higher protein type of diet back to general healthy eating. I also think that they have some courses that you can actually sign up and do online as well, if that's something you really want to get involved in. And that's it from me. So I will stop sharing my screen there, and I think we'll answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was so informative. We really appreciate your time tonight. So yes, we'll move straight into our Q&A time, and we've got a few questions for you. The first one is it safe and recommended to take probiotics whilst on immunotherapy?
Yeah, this is a really good one, and it comes up a lot. And so I actually hunted down some of the pharmacists that work to get a really good idea on this. So this is what they have told me, and I've written it down because I didn't want to get this wrong. So probiotics have potential immunomodulatory activity. So basically that just means that they have an effect on our immune system. Mm-hmm. So the general recommendation is to avoid the use of any complementary medicines that have this immune activity effect while on immunotherapy, because it's unclear how these may alter the effectiveness of the immunotherapy. So if you're on immunotherapy, it's kind of a blanket rule to sort of avoid probiotics. Generally speaking, in regards to, just health overall, and if you're interested in probiotics and you're not on immunotherapy, we don't really have enough evidence to kind of support that they are effective at doing anything, but we also don't have evidence to suggest that they're not. So probiotics, generally speaking, are a pretty safe thing to take if it's something you want to try. But that said, we don't really know if they do anything. It's best to kind of just eat a really varied diet in terms of gut health and include lots of fruits and vegetables.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Our second question, Megan, is what are the latest recommendations with consuming sugar and cancer? I know you've touched a lot on the myths around cancer and sugar, but is there any recommendations that you could give people in regards to that response?
Look, in specific to cancer, there isn't any. So, the idea that sugar feeds cancer and is detrimental to cancer is very much debunked by the science that's out there and the research that we've got. That said, I guess generally speaking, sugar or refined sugar is something we ideally want to kind of have in moderation, I guess, for general health and well-being, but it's not related to cancer. So there aren't actually any specific guidelines. And certainly during cancer treatment, we don't really want people to feel like they need to restrict anything, including sugar. And often if people aren't eating well, the first thing I'm telling them to do is to have a bowl of ice cream for dinner if they can't manage anything else, because it's really important we're maintaining weight. So yeah, there's not really any recommendations around that at all, and definitely during cancer treatment, no need to restrict it, but for general health, definitely having things like that in moderation.
Excellent, thank you so much. Our next question, Megan, is what are the guidelines into how much water I should be consuming each day?
Yeah, I feel like I've said this a million times tonight already, but it will be different for everyone. So we have like a general maths equation that kind of estimates how much fluid we want a patient to have based on their body weight. However, the best indication of whether you're getting enough fluid in is actually the color of your urine. So if your urine is pale straw colored or clear, then that's a good indication that you're on track with your hydration. If it's quite dark or smells, then it's a good reminder to have a drink of water or something else. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, great. We've sort of touched on this next one, but we had this question come through. So are there any supplements I should consider taking whilst on treatment?
Yeah. And again, it will be different for everybody. But look, in terms of nutritional supplement drinks, so like your protein drinks and things like Sustagen, these are really commonly used within the cancer population for people who are losing weight, struggling to eat, just to really make sure they're getting enough protein and calories. And they're pretty safe to incorporate if you feel that you fall into that category. That said, it would be best to just get some advice from either your dietitian if you're seeing one, but even your nurse or your doctor can kind of advise on those sorts of drinks. In terms of vitamins and mineral supplements, there are no general vitamins that you should take. And your doctor or your dietitian will let you know if this is something that you should be incorporating. And just as I mentioned earlier, if you find a vitamin or mineral supplement that you want to try, just flag it with your pharmacist first so they can make sure that it's safe.
Okay, great. Excellent. Our next question is, how can patients lose weight gained from treatment in a safe way after treatment is completed? For example, we've had the question come through, does intermittent fasting actually work?
Yeah, okay. I could spend hours talking about this particular topic, but I will try to keep it as short and sweet as possible. So firstly, a person's weight, and I guess with the exception of the unintended weight loss that we see within cancer treatment, but a person's weight tells us very little about a person's health. So that is, weight alone is not an indicator of your health status. Weight gain post-treatment can be a really common thing in particular cancer types, and it is caused by a whole list of factors that is way too long to go through now. If weight loss is something you're wanting to pursue, my first piece of advice, I guess, would be to focus on what foods you can include in your diet rather than trying to exclude anything. Like all foods have a place in a healthy diet, whether that be an apple or a piece of cake. So really focusing on, what can I include? Can I add in extra vegetables and extra fruits rather than I'm not going to eat cake ever again? Specifically to intermittent fasting, because again, we get this one a lot, and especially in the weight loss world, intermittent fasting comes up a lot. This is something that I'm often very quick to discourage, not just in cancer patients, but actually just in everyone from doing, especially if it's for the goal of weight loss. So diets that promote weight loss only work for as long as you're on them. And then for most people, they actually end up resulting in further weight gain when we return to our normal eating patterns. And restrictive diets are actually the single biggest predictor of disordered eating. So they can have some really, awful long-term consequences. So again, really trying to focus on foods that you can include more of to improve your overall health, and also try to have some non-weight related goals. So things such as improved energy or better sleep. Weight loss can be a really difficult thing to achieve, especially after cancer treatment. And you may find that you can improve your health in some really, really wonderful ways, but not actually see a difference in your weight. And that absolutely doesn't mean that you've failed. It just means that you've succeeded in a different way. So I hope that kind of answers it. Again, that's actually an area I'm really personally passionate about, because I'm a big believer that weight doesn't really tell us much at all. And weight loss and trying to achieve weight loss is a really difficult thing to do. So yeah, really trying to have some non-weight related health goals is a big one, I think.
That's really helpful. I think that's really covered it so well, Megan. And I think that is quite often one that we hear a lot as well. You're right. And I think that's a really good guide as well to also think about other goals, not just the weight loss itself. Yeah. We've just got one last question before I need to let you go. Do green vegetables have some particular health or nutritional benefit not available in other coloured vegetables?
Yeah. I feel like there's a big push at the moment for everyone to eat your greens, and we seem to care less about the reds and the blues and the purples and the yellows. So in short, no, all fruits and vegetables will have different types of nutrients and vitamins and things like that. So green vegetables are really high in some things, while, our red vegetables are really high in others. Green vegetables, and particularly those leafy greens, so spinach and broccoli and those sorts of things, are very vitamin and mineral dense. So you don't need to eat a lot of them to get quite a lot out of them. That said, it's actually best to try to have as much variety as possible, because like I said, they all contain different vitamins and minerals. And if we're having a big variety of colors, and I guess eating the rainbow, that means we're going to cover all bases in terms of our vitamins and minerals.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan. We've really appreciated your insight and your practical strategies. And we really want to thank you for giving your time to us this evening.
Welcome. And if anyone has any more questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A, and I can do some written responses throughout the rest of the night.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Great. We would now like to welcome Travis Hall. Travis holds a master's degree in clinical exercise physiology from Deakin University, which he completed in 2016. Travis has been working at Peter Mac since 2017 with a passion for integrating exercise medicine into cancer care for greater health outcomes. Travis has a particular interest in prehabilitation for major surgery and stem cell transplant candidates. Travis, thank you again for agreeing to present this evening. We would now like to invite you to begin your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Brooke, and thanks to the Melanoma Patients Australia team for the invite today. Really excited to speak to you all, patients, carers, and everyone else here about the role of exercise. It's really quite critical to every patient's journey, and even more so for the melanoma patient, as we'll go through in today's presentation. But I just wanted to start, with a quick quote about the general benefits of exercise in itself, that if we could get a pill that could have all the benefits of exercise, we would encapsulate that pill and we would give that to every single human on planet Earth. It is one of the best medicines that we have for our body, our body systems, and our long-term longevity, health, well-being. It is one of the best medicines that we have. And so you might hear me reference a few times in today's presentation about exercise medicine, because that's how we are starting to view exercise, not as so much of a nicety, something to tack on to your day, but actually a medicine that we can prescribe for people and give people, and that have real benefits to people's health and well-being, and particularly people who have an oncology or a cancer diagnosis that benefit really the most from exercise. Which is part of what a lot of research, years and years of research, has been accumulating into this position statement here, which was released a couple of years ago now, requesting that exercise be embedded as part of standard practice in cancer care and viewed as an adjunct therapy that helps counteract adverse effects of cancer and its treatment. So we're talking about, not only are people now getting prescribed radiotherapy, chemotherapy, immunotherapies, but that exercise should be seen as an adjunct, a part of your treatment plan to help manage some of the side effects and make sure you look after your body, your health, and help potentially improve your treatment outcomes as well. But first, I just wanted to start with an area that we commonly have to describe as an exercise physiologist as the difference between physical activity and exercise. And so physical activity is any bodily movement produced by the skeletal muscles that require energy expenditure. So this is commonly things that you would do around the house, maybe you potter around the garden, you cook and clean, etc., as a very broad category of what physical activity is. And this is something that people tell us that they do a lot of. Some people have really high levels of physical activity across the day, but the difference is that exercise is planned, it's structured, it's repetitive, and it has a purpose to what you're trying to do. As like a medicine, we will prescribe dosage, we'll prescribe frequency. How often should I be doing this, to how much volume to get the benefits of this medicine? So, and just at the bottom there are some of the key components of what we may try and target in an exercise program. Cardiovascular endurance or cardiovascular fitness, extremely important. Muscle strength, endurance, body composition, flexibility, they're all types of benefits of exercise that need to be structured to get the benefits from them. And how much exercise should we all be doing? Well, for healthy populations, we're looking at 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity exercise over the week, or half of that in vigorous intensity exercise. In combination with strength training, which is strength training for building muscle, muscle strength, muscle size, and we're looking for 2 sessions per week. So that's the healthy population. Now, that seems like quite a lot, but it can be broken up into a number of smaller bouts across the week. In oncology populations, and that encapsulates everyone that has cancer, we're looking for 90 minutes. So that can be 3 30-minute bouts across the week, but aiming to build up towards those healthy population guidelines. There is a dose response relationship between the amount of exercise that you do and the benefits of doing them. So in other words, the more exercise that you do, the more benefits that you'll get from it. So don't limit yourself at 90 minutes just because this is what the guidelines are saying. If you can achieve more, then that will get further benefits for you. And the recommendation for strength training is the same, 2 times per week, but you could do additional sessions throughout the week as well for some additional benefits. You would just want to make sure that you do that in a structured manner. And so in particular for melanoma patients, there was a study done which was a survey conducted through the MPA Facebook group actually, which looked into activity levels of melanoma patients who are undergoing immunotherapy. And overall, the results were quite reassuring that 56% of melanoma patients are active, with walking the most common form, which is what we see as well as part of my practice as well, is that walking is probably the most common form of exercise that most people complete. But a majority of people did report that immunotherapy affected their capacity to exercise. That can be from a range of physical and emotional barriers that come up. Fatigue is a big barrier that we see a lot of. But on the other side, you can see here that part of the benefits of exercise that were reported from this group was fatigue reduction. So we'll go through this in a little bit more detail in coming slides, but exercise is extremely important for fatigue reduction. Once again, this is why I went through that physical activity against exercise, because a lot of people in this survey were reporting doing lots of physical activity, but not many people were reporting doing structured exercise, such as walking for a specific amount of time, for a specific intensity, for a specific benefit. And that's what I'm trying to get you all to think about today, is how can we structure some more exercise within your week so that you get the appropriate benefits from that form of exercise. And another study here, so looking at skeletal muscle mass and its importance for the melanoma patient as well. And what we can know is that those that 24% of melanoma patients have sarcopenia, which is extremely low levels of muscle mass, and 33% on top of that have low muscle mass. So a majority of melanoma patients have a low level of muscle mass and muscle strength associated with that. And those people that had those characteristics had 5 times greater treatment-related side effects. So people who have low muscle mass have greater side effects as a result of their treatment. There's also some emerging evidence about the role that muscle mass has within the immune system. And these are just starting to be understood in greater detail now, but there is some evidence suggesting that having higher levels of muscle mass and completing muscle strengthening training can also help the benefits of immunotherapy treatments. And as you can see on the right-hand side in this slide here, is that those that had the higher levels of muscle mass had greater survival outcomes as well. And that could be as a result of those of having greater immunotherapy effects of having greater muscle mass, or it could be a result of other side effects of treatment and how they interact with your treatment outcomes as well. You will note that I haven't put any exercise intervention studies here, and unfortunately there's not a lot of research out there for melanoma patients and exercise in themselves. Peter Mac was conducting a study that's still under analysis at the moment, hopefully to be published soon, but showing some reassuring results about the benefits of exercise. And we do take some of the known benefits of exercise from other studies, and we can replicate that with melanoma patients as well, such as these here, that we know that treatment has side effects, and you can see them on the left-hand side there, and it's by no means exhaustive, this list here, but some of the most common: fatigue, muscle mass loss, decreased physical function, weight gain, peripheral neuropathy. These are just really some of the most common side effects of treatment, and exercise is really one of the best medicines for each one of these side effects of treatments, so it's a decrease or helping manage fatigue, increasing muscle mass, physical function, improving body composition, mental health, well-being, etc. There's really one of the best medicines to help manage these side effects and help alleviate them in the long term as well. And so this, I knew I would get this as part of the presenting to you today as fatigue, as it really is the number one side effect that I see when working with melanoma patients. And it can be extremely distressing, extremely debilitating and persistent in patients. And it's actually quite hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it before, that it can be completely disproportionate to your level of exertion. I've heard of some people who have gone from a very high level of functioning, potentially running marathons and things like that, to really struggling with even just walking to the shops and back. But that doesn't potentially show their underlying level of fitness. It's just that fatigue is so profound that it impacts their usual functioning. And so this is extremely common across all cancer groups, but really common in those who are undergoing immunotherapy type treatments. And it's quite a complex overlay of different mechanisms at work, but we do know through really rigorous evidence that exercise is one of the best medicines that we have for cancer-related fatigue, for helping manage it. So a structured exercise program is one of the best medicines for managing it, as well as helping alleviate it. And there is some benefits shown that psychological intervention can also be beneficial as well. And this is the cycle that we see people go through from time while going through treatments, that the treatment causes fatigue and people significantly reduce their activity levels, start spending more time in bed, resting because I feel tired. And then we get a level of deconditioning associated with reduced activity, and then fatigue increases, and it just fuels this cycle. So we need to at times break this cycle to get to help alleviate the fatigue. So find a little bouts of exercise throughout the day that we can help improve your physical functioning, get some of those benefits of exercise. When you do exercise and you feel good after completing it, some of those natural endorphins, that's one of the best antidotes for breaking this cycle. And so what about when we finish treatment? We finish treatment and some of those side effects start to decrease. We know that exercise is really important into this stage for helping build up that potentially some of that deconditioning that has happened, help reduce level of fatigue that can be long-standing after finishing treatment, help reduce likelihood of long-term and late effects of treatment, which aren't well defined in the melanoma patient group, but we know that exercise is really important for reducing risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease such as type 2 diabetes, and really a host of other diseases which can be common after finishing treatment. Exercise is one of the best antidotes for that as well. And so what are the goals of a cancer patient or melanoma patient is really to avoid inactivity, try and reduce the amount of time that you're spending lying down, resting, and find little opportunities across the day to implement some exercise. We will want to restore or improve physical functioning, cardiovascular fitness, strength and flexibility, and this will in turn improve your cardiorespiratory system, your endocrine, neurologic, muscle, cognitive, all those systems starting to work better, improve quality of life, body image, weight loss, improve your treatment tolerance, reduce risk of reoccurrence and development of potentially other cancers, prevent or mitigate long-term or late effects of treatments, and improve the ability to cope with current or future cancer treatments. At times, potentially you may go through a surgery after finishing immunotherapy or other types of treatment, and we want to make sure you have a resilient level of resilience to be able to deal with that and recover from that well. And so when might things not go so wrong? When starting an exercise program would be that your treatment team is not fully aware of your plan to exercise. So it's really important to keep your treatment team aware of your intentions, what you plan to do, how much, and they might be able to give some immediate advice about what's appropriate or not at different times within your treatment. And secondary to that, pushing for abnormal symptoms such as pain, excessive breathlessness or dizziness, and these are signs that sometimes the body is not tolerating that exercise that well. It might be too much, it might be too intense, and so we just need to be aware of our body and our systems and understanding that cancer treatments do have additional stress on our body, and we don't want to at times stress it too much on top of that. And third is boom bust behaviors, which are also common, particularly in the high achieving young population potentially of melanoma patients, where when you feel good, when you have that week off potentially of treatment where you go and do heaps and heaps of exercise, and when you feel really poor, you don't do anything. And so what you end up finding is people exacerbate that fatigue by doing too much and then exacerbate the fatigue again by not doing enough. And we need to find a nice periodized approach to that exercise. So you're doing little bouts of exercise when you're feeling poor and doing the appropriate amount when feeling better. And so the where to from now would be, my recommendation would be start thinking about an exercise plan. It doesn't have to be too extravagant, but writing it down, making a diary, making a commitment to starting some exercise. And usually the easiest way to start is to do the exercise that's most familiar with you. Potentially walking is really easy to start off with, and be nice and structured in that approach. Have open discussions with your treating team about your intention to exercise. And I think this is important, that you should consider consulting an exercise physiologist in your area. Hopefully your treating team or your treating hospital or your local private GP might have a contact in your area that can really help tailor that exercise program to you alongside your treatment, give you advice alongside that as well. It's a key part of your treatment plan. And discuss your plans and intentions to exercise with those around you, and to help get some additional support as well. So a common question that we get is what actually is an exercise physiologist? Some haven't heard of us before, and we are a university qualified allied health professional with the skills in delivering exercise interventions for people with acute, subacute or chronic medical conditions, injuries or disabilities. And in basic, we use exercise as medicine to help manage disease and improve health and well-being of our patients. And I think there's ever more evidence suggesting that exercise is really one of those key medicines for a host of all oncology and non-oncology related conditions. And so what can you expect if you were to go see an exercise physiologist? We'd want to know a bit about your oncology history, some of the treatments, side effects, impact on you, and your other medical history as well. We'd consider doing a physical assessment to your current capacity, and give you some education on the importance of exercise, develop a tailored exercise plan for you around your current capacity to do that, and then adjust that accordingly going forward. We'd consider doing supervised or unsupervised, depending on what your preference may be, and then check in at regular time points across your treatment to monitor your progress and adjust things accordingly in terms of what's working and what's not. And we can adjust to make sure that you're getting the right volume and intensity of that exercise medicine. And so that's all I had in store for today. I'm happy to take questions now, or welcome to send me an email. My email is at the bottom there for any questions that might crop up in the future.
Thank you so much, Travis. We've got quite a few questions that have come through. So yes, I think there's a lot of information there for people to take in, and some really good guidance, as well as, what are some really practical things that you can be doing, and what are the latest recommendations. So thank you. Okay. Our first question, Travis, is what are the recommendations in relation to exercise and undergoing immunotherapy?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we haven't quite defined that as so far in the research yet. But like I said, we do take a lot of our knowledge in that regards from other areas, and we know that exercise is safe alongside immunotherapy, and we know that it's going to be effective for improving physical functioning, reducing fatigue levels, helping improve stamina and exercise tolerance as well. So we know that's what we know currently alongside it. So I would be recommending exercise for everyone undergoing immunotherapy. And I think this is an important factor of just consulting A, your medical team, and B, having someone on side your team, such as an exercise physiologist or potentially a physiotherapist, who can help monitor you, adjust your exercise accordingly. Because there's nothing worse than having a program in front of you that you just can't complete. It's just, you don't have the physical capacity. So, to have someone on your team to be able to look at you, to adjust things, to manipulate things to your current capacity around maybe some of the peak side effects of treatment is going to be really important. And particularly as people go through, I believe some of the treatments for melanoma patients can go up for, up to 2 years. So, we need to be able to kind of adjust things accordingly along the timeline.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much. I think that's a really good response. And the next question we have, which probably sort of ties into some of the things you just touched on there, Travis, was, can an exercise physiologist prescribe me home-based exercises to do while I'm completing my treatment?
Absolutely. That's definitely something we do really commonly. Sometimes it can be difficult to get into a hospital or the gym alongside treatment, or it's not the patient's preference to do so. And so sometimes, the home exercises can be extremely beneficial as well, depending on what equipment that you have, what level of functioning that you're at. Would all have to be adjusted around. So, potentially, if someone like Darren came into my clinic while he was undergoing treatment, that we might consider using some of his potential, gym equipment at home if he had a gym, or if he didn't, that we could develop some home exercises for him to do, depending on what level that he's at. We might say that the home exercises might not be as appropriate for Darren if he was coming through in a really high level of functioning, that we might consider having to go towards the gym to get the right volume and intensity of exercise for the benefits. But for the general population, yes, we do prescribe home exercises all the time, and they are good to have, and particularly good to have in the times when you're not feeling as great as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose that it's also really appropriate given the COVID position that we're in as well. It's a really good point that people can just bear in mind. Yeah, thank absolutely. You. The next question we have, Travis, is how much exercise should I aim to complete during the day?
I guess we usually go for across the week rather than across the day, but we would try and accumulate 90 minutes across the week. So, across in a single day, you might consider doing anywhere between 10 to a 60-minute bout, depending on where your individual capacity is at and what you can tolerate at the time. So, that's very person dependent on your current capacity. But even small bouts of exercise, smaller bouts have been shown to be beneficial as well. If it's just 5 minutes is all you can manage, then that's going to be beneficial for you as well. And then starting to build that over time is my recommendation.
Okay, yep, that's really helpful. Thank you. And our last question that we've got tonight, Travis, is I've been recommended to do some light exercises, but I don't really know where to begin. What would you advise?
Some light exercises, yeah, absolutely. We usually do start off with, a lighter program when prescribing exercise and then start to build from there. So extremely common. Some really functional tasks is usually a good place to start. It doesn't need to be too extravagant to get the benefits of exercise. So it might be some things like some squatting up and down off your chair, which are, good for the thigh, the glute muscles, some stepping up and down, some heel raises, some push-ups on the wall might be another good one as well. And just, if you want to start off with some light exercises, then considering, all the kind of different major muscle groups and how you can include them within a program, and just basing it on how that you're feeling is a good place to start. And then, like I said, the more that you can do in terms of volume and building up over time, the more benefits that you'll get from that exercise. So if you start off light, potentially look at either enlisting an exercise physiologist into your team to help look at how you can build that up, or slowly look at how you can increase the volume of your training to get towards more moderate exertions where a lot more of the benefits of exercise will be apparent.
Okay, brilliant. That's really helpful. That I think there's been a lot we've really touched on so far, and it all sort of ties in together beautifully, doesn't it, with the diet and exercise component. Beautiful, Travis. Well, we really appreciate your time again this evening, and we know that you're very busy people, and we really appreciate you taking the time to present to us tonight. Thank you.
That's fine, no worries. I thought I'd just add as well that you can speak to your GP to get a chronic disease management plan, to get an exercise physiologist involved within your care, and there's subsidised sessions as well. And I realise there might be a few people potentially in Melbourne still in lockdown, so they can be done via telehealth as well. So just an important consideration that if it's I know we're in lockdown at the moment, but we can still be involved in your care through your GP and to provide tailored exercise as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you so much, Travis, for thinking of that as well. And that's a good point, that people can access that as well to just get the ball rolling and to start accessing
Absolutely.
the service. Yeah.
No problems.
Thanks you
everyone.
again.
Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you. I'd now like to introduce our patient speaker, Darren Purcell. Darren is a stage 4 patient who has been a long-term supporter of MPA and has a particular interest in exercise and nutrition. He is also a former world champion rower. Tonight, Darren is going to share his personal experience of living with melanoma and his tips on nutrition and exercise. A very well welcome for Darren. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you everybody for having me. It's a privilege to be able to come in and have a chat tonight, and really hoping that I sort of prompt at least someone here to get up and do a little bit of exercise, because it's been, for me, a game changer in how I've dealt with the treatment and the illness. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I'm currently living in Hobart, and I am off the back of stage 4 melanoma. I've recently finished my treatment cycle in September from kicking off this journey in January 2019, and I've been involved with the MPA group since mid-2019 as a result of that. So I thought I'd just give a quick wrap up on my melanoma sort of history and the background of that. I originally had a mole taken out when I was 14 in the year 2000, and this was located in the top part of my back, just south of my neck. And it was probably associated with growing up in Queensland with many holidays spent at the Gold Coast, incidental sun damage collectively accumulating into that. And here we have a couple of images of what it was progressed as when I was re-diagnosed as stage 4 in 2019. And the frightening thing is that between those two timeframes, the 19 years, I'd really not had any side effects in the end of it, and was essentially shown those images right at the start, which is incredibly frightening. But naturally, you would think I'd maybe not had looked after the skin as much living in Queensland and such, but we had my grandfather, he was diagnosed with melanoma in circa 1996 in the mid-90s, and as a result of that, we were all very aware, and unfortunately we lost him in 2008. So he had a good road after his initial stage 2, but eventually there was no treatment options for him when it came back in 2018, unlike us. My treatment history, so we kicked off in 2019 with the target therapy, and I'd like to sort of point out this image at the bottom here, and for me, mentally, seeing this as a progress, because it was something on the outside of my skin. The image on the left-hand side with that lesion in the skull, luckily not in the brain, but that the difference between those two images is about a week and a half to 2 weeks, which is truly incredible. And I was lucky to be able to have that as a motivator to think about what else would be happening internally. But naturally, because there was something going on in the head, we had a lot of complications to deal with that head thing. And in the end, we were able to remove a section of that skull, which was quite badly damaged from the lump going through the skull. And that left a nice little pool of water in my head whenever I was in the shower. But eventually we were able to replace that nice divot with some titanium mesh to kick off the Ipi-Nivo dose, which commenced in, I think, May 19, and as I mentioned, has recently completed in September 21. So a hell of a long journey. And it's not been without its complications. Was fatigue still, even having finished, is a massive thing to manage. Like many patients, we've had significant rash issues, had some inflamed lungs, which were a bit of a surprise, and the usual weight gain, which we see a lot with many patients. So I just thought I'd have a bit of a chat as well about what my fitness background is. And initially, I used to be a rugby player, and in the winter, and then I'd row in the summer through the school program. But after having that initial mole taken out, I wasn't really able to play rugby, given where it was at the top of my back. So I started to take up a little bit more rowing outside of school, and really became addicted. And that came off the back of having spent a little bit more time doing the sport, time active, time involved, just more exercise, basically. When the next season came round, I found myself going from being at the bottom end of the group to being at the top end of the group. And that was a massive motivator for me as a young man, and as well something that I carry forth now is, if you put in the effort for not just fitness but anything, the rewards will naturally come, and especially with exercise. I mean, the more effort we put into it, the better we can go. And I was really lucky enough in my rowing career to have been able to represent Queensland from 2005 to 2015. And the highlight of that was winning the Penrith Cup, which is the Interstate Lightweight 4. We won it representing Queensland, and for the first time ever by Queensland in 2013, and onwards in 2014 and 15. And I think they've won it a few times since then as well. And was also really lucky and fortunate to have been able to represent the country from 2006 to 2015, picking up, as I mentioned before, some world championship and a couple of silvers and a bronze along the way. So that was really cool. But naturally, rowing comes to an end. And for me, I actually think that cancer was something that helped me finish up with rowing. Many elite athletes talk about the mental battles of finishing sport. Sport and elite sport and professional sport is all consuming. You live and breathe everything that you do. And as an athlete, I was doing 30 hours a week of training and doing 25 hours of work. So just to be able to make ends meet, naturally, off the back of finishing rowing, to deal with it mentally, I just sunk myself into work. I did a full load of work, took on some further study, and basically just filled that void with something else. And in many ways, I really struggled with the idea of doing exercise. I'd done so much activity as training, and I didn't really grasp the difference between exercise and training. But cancer was great in the sense that it completely took me from hero to zero, and thinking about going out for a walk for 15 minutes was aspirational. In the first few weeks of the diagnosis phase, walking to the end of the corridor in the hospital was something to aspire to, let alone walking 15 minutes out at the street. In fact, a week and a half in being in hospital, I was frightened to walk along the street outside of the hospital just to get a bit of fresh air. And I made sure that I took my phone and I told the nurses where I was going, because doing something was a daunting thing. So the exercise really helped to build the confidence that we could take on more in life. So then there's a lot of things that rowing has also helped me develop for taking on the cancer. And the biggest thing about that is being a student of your body. And we talk about that as an athlete, about constantly paying attention to what your body's doing, how to best prepare for races, how to best eat before races, how to best warm up for races, and then how to best recover from races, and what food to have and what exercise to do afterwards, and as well with the training that you might do leading into a competition over the months. And then for cancer coming in for me, for melanoma coming in for me, it was great, because it gave me the opportunity to really focus on that to beat the illness. So I started to put a lot of energy into what do I need to do to look after my body. And it became an experiment. I basically set myself up a personal little clinical trial to figure out what I could do using what foods and what training to best manage the treatment process, to best manage recovery, to best manage my fatigue and the side effects. And off the back of the treatment, it took me a solid 18 months to figure out how that picture looked for me. And for me, it was a 30 minutes of light aerobic activity the morning of the treatment. Really, really light aerobic activity, just something a little bit more than going for a walk in many ways. But then it also involved going for a walk after treatment. And for me, walking 20 to 30 minutes home was enough to kind of walk it out in many ways, or do a warm down after a race. But it was also important to pay attention to what I was doing in the days afterwards to manage the fatigue. If I did nothing, I would feel much worse for a long period of time. But if I did something, the recovery from the treatment became much better, much more manageable, and I was able to bounce back from the treatment much better. And I'll use an example that treatment was often on a Thursday, and if on the phases where I managed going into treatment well and bouncing out of treatment well, I was able to go back for a bike ride on the Tuesday afterwards for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the other thing that, as an athlete, that you think about is that every moment you do something is a decision point. And as an athlete, you think about, is this going to help or hinder my chances of achieving my goal? So every time I did something as a patient now, it was, is this going to help or hinder my likelihood of recovery, my likelihood of beating the illness, my likelihood of getting to the next scan? So that thought process that I used as an athlete, that motivated me as an athlete, was key to motivate me as a patient to beat the illness. The illness was now the sport. The illness was now the goal to try and get to. And that goal focused mentality as an athlete that many people talk of, it's easy because a bigger picture as an athlete might be world championships at the end of the season. So then the medium goal might just be getting selected halfway through the season, and then the short-term goals can be broken down into, what do I need to do each week to get to that end goal in mind? Or even from a bigger picture, it might be an Olympic cycle, thinking 4 years, breaking it down to halfway points and so on. But as a cancer patient, as a melanoma patient going through immunotherapy, it might be difficult to have a long sight. And I think that that process of picking short, medium, and long-term goals is incredibly powerful to give you direction and focus to get through the challenging days. And eating, how does everything fix into that? As an athlete, everything is associated to food. If the food that you can consume is directly related to the performance, I mean, you wouldn't put rubbish petrol into a Formula One car, so why would you put rubbish food into you? And as an athlete, I was a lightweight rower, so we had to manage our weight to be at 70 kilos on racing day. And so there was a huge balancing act there about how much energy and food to bring in with the performance that we would perform at, and then obviously actually being small enough and light enough to be able to race and to be eligible to race. So you're constantly trying to get heavier, to get stronger, to perform more, but then eating less to stay skinny, to get onto the scales on the day of racing. And in that process, I learned a lot about how the different foods affected my body by increasing weight or increasing performance, and that approach, bringing that into treatment, was twisted in a very different way. So my focus shifted to, how can I feed my body the best things to give it the best shot at fighting this? And naturally, Dr. Google has a lot to say about that, which might not be Megan's best advice, but for me personally, it came back to the simple things of eating broad variety, massive variety of natural-based foods. I've pretty much eliminated, other than ice cream, all the processed foods. So ice cream, chocolate, you're not going anywhere. Processed foods, that being said, we're pretty much gone. And that was kind of off the back of that philosophy of maintaining to be a student of my own body. And the interesting thing about that we learn from the volatilities of being an athlete is that there's no hard and fast rules. There's no way that what you do one week isn't going to work in the same week. And we have to be adaptive about how things might change. I mean, our body's changing from the treatment, so our body needs to have different things going into it. And, from a simple real perspective, apples for me, I used to eat 2 to 3 a day, maybe even more. I'd have this in my desk at work. I'd have this bag of apples, which was basically topped up every other day. But since treatment, I can't eat an apple. My stomach just doesn't like them, and so I've had to replace them with something else. And I'm still kind of in that game of working out what that piece is. It might be bananas, but maybe chocolate, either or. So then how does exercise fit into this? My philosophy towards exercise now is not about doing training, but I need to be fitter beat this illness. So the fitter that I can be, and very early on in my treatment, I came up with the philosophy that, or the mindset, I suppose, that if I get fitter from this, from 15 minutes of walking down the street, if that's my baseline, if I can work up from there, I'm going to have a better body to be able to beat the illness. And I started working towards 1 hour buying me a day of time at the end of it. So every day I try to do an hour of exercise to buy me another day, whatever that end point is. And you know, that's not an easy thing to kind of achieve. And for me, the start of that was after recovering from those initial surgeries. It was jumping on the exercise bike, and I was lucky enough to have an exercise bike at home. And all I could muster up, once walking up the stairs, which was even more difficult, was jumping on the exercise bike for 15 minutes. And I was just capable of turning the legs over, and I was sweating bullets. It was almost embarrassing from what I was able to do a few years beforehand. And then off the back of that, it was getting back downstairs and needing to take a rest for 3 hours. I thought, geez, this is a bit ordinary. It doesn't seem to be very good bang for my buck. But after persisting with this over a few weeks, the 3 hours of nap after 15 minutes of sweating bullets was starting to decrease. And then, you know, over a period of time, over another month or so, I was able to increase the duration of the intensity. And then again, this athlete addictive state came into the extent of, oh, what can I push to? What can I push these boundaries? How far can I go? Do I push the time out by a few minutes? Do I push the intensity out by a few watts? And as a result of that, I had a huge mental boost in many ways to get through the illness, because I was feeling like I could take on more, could do more exercise. The sense of achievement that improvement brought was beyond any results that anybody could tell me from the scans. I kind of knew that if I was capable of producing more watts for more time, that of course the scans would have to be getting better. And then what more to that is that once I was capable of producing a bit more power and producing a bit more output, and for a longer period of time, I was then able to enjoy a little bit more time with my boys. And you know, for that to not have to go and have a nap after 10 playing with kids, and I could stay there for a bit of time with them, and I couldn't put a value on that in itself. So I've kind of skirted it there around a little bit around what the fatigue is. And fatigue for me has been a huge thing to overcome. And fundamentally, my personal rule to deal with that is just persist with it. Do the training, do the exercise, do the work. And again, that's probably come off the back of the athlete mentality that, well, if you don't do that training session, the competition will, and the competition will beat you. And in this game, it's the competition is the illness. And my thought process there of just doing the exercise, even when feeling awful, my body would do one of two things. From the worst moments of being fatigued, I'd still do it, and I would go one of two ways. The little bit of exercise would either push me completely.
Hi there, Darren. Can you still hear us? We just seem to be having some technical issues.
For a little bit of exercise, whether it's 15 minutes, 20, 30, hour, 2, whatever it was, I would feel better. And then the sleeping well. I mean, I found it really difficult to sleep well through the training, through the treatment. And whilst it's quite anecdotal for myself, but on the days that I would do the exercise come the evening, I would struggle to sleep and have a restless night. And the days on the days that I didn't do the exercise, I would struggle to sleep and have a restless night. But on the day I did do some exercise, stick to my guns, sleeping was really good, and I'd get all the way through the night, barring the odd heel from the 4-year-old in the ribs. And I think that things go hand in hand as to how to deal with fatigue. And then there's one big sort of thing for me about how exercise fits into the picture of cancer. I came back as stage 4 19 years after the original mole removal. For 16 of those years, I was trying to be the best that I could be as an athlete. And for 2 years after kind of finishing rowing, I was staying moderately fit. I was going for a ride, I was going for a run, I was doing lots of different things. And then the last year, I dropped the ball entirely. I took on too much at work. I took on too much of another degree and another baby along the way. And that was the time where the illness came back. So I personally believe, for me, and will never be able to prove it, but I do believe that the fitness was the thing for that period of time that kept the illness away. And as a result of that, now I'm working towards getting back to that fitness as well as possible. Maybe not in the intensity and the output, but certainly in a portion of the volume. Might not necessarily have 40 hours a week to train, but being as active as possible, sticking to my daily training is the thing that keeps me going, and the thing that I can do to take on the illness. The drugs that we have, we don't really have much control over when we take them or what they are, but we do have control of what we eat. We do have control of what we do as exercise, and they're the things that we can take on to beat this illness. But naturally, there's a lot of positive things there about the exercise, but there are a few downers that come along. And as an athlete, you just come to terms with accepting the crap, and that you acknowledge that there will be rubbish days. You learn from those rubbish days, and you often use those as the things that motivate you to keep on going. And as an athlete, I look back at the races, and there's probably 1 in 10 that you are actually happy with. 9 out of 10 of those races that you do, you're not happy with. You might have had a rubbish row, or not prepared properly, or call it a learning experience. And your longevity in the sport really hinges on your ability to pick yourself up from those rubbish ones. The thing in treatment, the capacity to pick yourself up when you're on the down is the thing that will be there to be the morale booster. And there's one vivid moment that I recall walking out of my door, and on a really rubbish day of fatigue, thinking, I just need to get somewhere and I need to do some exercise. And I went for a walk up the street to the shops, and just to get a piece of chocolate or something to a treat as a motivator to get there. And there was a bloke on the other side of the street who was also walking up the street. And I thought, my athlete mentality came out, where when you're on the river and I was able to get there. I didn't beat the guy to the shop, but I knew that because I was able to overcome that challenge, I could take on whatever the next big challenge might be. So that moment for me was the moment where it really reinforced that doing something was better than doing nothing. And that not only helps the positive routine, but it gives you that mental burst for overcoming any challenge that might face. And for me, those days of when things are not going well, it's winding back the intensity. Maybe just going for a bushwalk with a family or doing some gardens, but taking that as an opportunity to learn from what your body's doing to predict the bad days and to tweak your efforts moving forward so that you can get through those those bad days better, which is naturally all we want to do. So where are we at the moment in terms of using good food and good exercise to manage things? I still have very, very, very constant fatigue things. I've got body aches. I've got a huge amount of weight gain from where I was from the steroids, from the treatment, or the side effects. And I'm still learning about the different things that are working, and the acceptance that some days things will go well with what I've generally been doing, but then constantly being adaptive to that might not necessarily happen next week. It might not necessarily work next week. And then as a result, taking some time to reflect on what's been done and how it's impacted my body and its capacity to get through those rubbish days. And that's something that in many ways I'm happy to take on that challenge and enjoy that challenge as a way to beat the illness. So that I think is a fair bit of coverage there, and I hope that it's helped everybody, or someone, at least one person, get up and go and do something when they're feeling a bit ordinary.
Thank you so much, Darren, for your moving and really insightful story. I think, we're all really feeling inspired. There's so much you can do, as you say, and just starting sometimes really small and getting that confidence back can just be all you need just to get that motivation. And, your story's really shown us that tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel so privileged to have such wonderful guest speakers and cover such a really important topic of diet and exercise. And I know we're really getting close now to 8:30, but do you mind if we ask just the one question, Darren, this evening?
Yeah, sure.
We had a question come through that, is it recommended to do the exercise, in your opinion, all together in that 1 hour block, or is it better just to break it up into 15-minute time slots?
I think that's an interesting one, because I look at that as coming back to being a student of my own body and being a student of what you're capable with. And I certainly went through phases where I couldn't do more than 15 minutes. I just purely couldn't, on the exercise bike, couldn't actually turn the legs over any further. So would then squeeze in a second moment later on in the day to try and get it up when I was feeling as though I was capable of doing it. And I think it just comes back to that question of doing something is better than doing nothing. And if you can do it, do it. And if you can do it again, do it again. Because there's only good that can come from it.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up, doesn't it? And I think that's really good advice. So, once again, we really, really want to thank you for, taking time out of your busy night, and we'll now let you get back to your family. So thank you.
Thank you.
This now completes our session tonight, which is the third of 4 webinars in this series. And I encourage you to watch out for our next one, to be held on November 9th, which will be covering the topic of melanoma health checks and monitoring. We will automatically send you a link to register for this one, and we encourage you to invite your friends and family along. Thanks once again, MSD, for supporting us in this webinar series of wellness. Good night, everybody, and thank you so much for being a part of this with us.